underlies everything else. It's latent, it's coming out. Evolutionary idealism. It's sometimes spoken of as immanentistic, in that any divine being, absolute ground of being is immanent in the entirety. That has profound theological consequences. It means that there is no transcendent God who has to reveal himself to creatures who are external to himself. So there's no such thing as special revelation. Because if the divine is immanent, then the divine self-consciousness wells up within your self-consciousness. Yes. So there is no such thing as special revelation, acts of revelation. There is no such thing as ex nihilo creation. There is no such thing as a historic act of redemption. It's all process. From within, immanent. There's no unique incarnation. How can there be if there isn't a transcendent God to incarnate himself? The incarnation is simply a symbol for talking of the immanence of the divine in everything. So watch for this when we get to Hegel's philosophy of religion. Immanentism. The metaphysic is sometimes described as gradualism. That is to say, everything in existence is to some degree mind, spirit, consciousness. The old notion of degrees of being all up the hierarchy, you see, is now translated into a developmental process. The process of evolution is the development of greater degrees in the graduated process, greater degrees of mind, spirit. This is part of the evolutionary optimism. And for Hegel, the fullest manifestation of spirit comes out in German culture. Where else would you expect? Yeah, this was the age of nationalism. Why? Because what is nationalism? It's the embodiment, the full self-discovery, self-realization of the identity of the spirit of a people. You see, nationalism is a product of Romanticism, a product of this German idealism. And then I was going to say it's Romanticism. Well, I think you already see that. When Wordsworth odes to daffodils, and your heart dances with the daffodils, that's not just metaphor, you see. The daffodils dance is a free, creative manifestation of a certain degree of creative spirit at work there that is at work more fully in your heart. And so your heart, responding to the stimulus, joins in one great chorus of dance. You see? Romanticism. Well, this is where we're going with German idealism. Now, what I'd like to do is to say a comment or two about these other figures. Questions? Okay. Do you get the picture that I've been trying to paint? I think if you can grasp this and the other illustrations that I'm going to use, you'll find that reading the bits and pieces of Hegel that we have makes sense. But read Stumpf first. He'll give you more of an overpicture, though what he does is to give you an almost dead overpicture, as if it's a logical system rather than a developmental process. The thing that does it best, I think, in brief compass is this, though I'm indebted as well to a book on Hegel by a graduate of ours, Merold Westphal, W-E-S-T-P-H-A-L, who teaches at Fordham University in the Bronx. And is a first-rate Hegel scholar. He's been president of the Hegel Society of America. But his book is very, very helpful in catching this. Okay, as I was saying, the conception of what unifies the self, what is the function, which is the dominant unifying function, the all-absorbing function of the self. Viktor, who died in 1814, and incidentally was enamored with the figure of Napoleon, the figure on the white horse marching through Europe. This is the romanticist figure embodying so much, you see. Viktor is raising the question of what is the ground that underlies all our experience. What is it that is the precondition, to use the Kantian term, the precondition that makes human-type experience possible, that makes our consciousness the way it is? Now, that's the good Kantian question. He rejects dogmatic metaphysics, as did Kant. He opts for a transcendental method, as did Kant. And the thing that he finds as he describes the experience of the self is that the nature of the self comes through prominently as that of a moral being, where the will is the dominant and most revealing faculty. Now, interestingly, his phenomenological description that leads to that is more of a description of the epistemological side. He poses, for instance, the old question from Descartes, how do I know that material bodies exist? It's an old one. Berkeley would have been happy for that. How do you know that material bodies exist? And his initial response, of course, is a description of the skepticism that results from people like Berkeley and Hume. I don't know that physical bodies exist. But in my moral struggle, my inner moral struggle between duty and desire, between acting out of duty and just following my inclinations in the world around me, I find that my moral life postulates, there's that term again, we had it in Kant, it posits the existence of a non-self that is opposed to the moral life of the self. So that it's in the moral life where we find the opposite of the moral will. The opposite of the moral will is that which is posited. You see, posited by the will, as it were. There is no proof that a physical non-self world exists. But whatever it is in that non-self, it stands in sort of a dialectical opposition to the self, as we know it in the moral life, don't we? Yes, so then, if we're going to talk about the nature of reality, what is it going to be? That is to say, if the self-consciousness is the key to reality, and this lens allows me to project a picture of reality on the overall screen, you see, what am I going to say about the nature of reality? Well, obviously, in the reality as a whole, there is no antithesis to the self. You can't have this as both A and non-A. And what is projected is that it comes out as ego. absolute ego, absolute will. That is to say, reality as a whole has what we would call the conative characteristics. Yes, in varying degrees. In humans, there is conscious will, moral will. In animal life, instinctual drive. In vegetative life, the constant thrust of things to grow, to survive. You see? The resistance that even inanimate things offer to extraneous forces. In all of these cases, what you see is manifestations of will or pre-developments of will in opposition to that which is other than itself. You see? The rock that resists disintegration. The plant that thrusts itself up through the soil. The animal with his instinctual drive and fight to survive. And the human, willing to act out of duty rather than just giving in to inclination. So his conception comes out that way. The way in which he pictures it then is this sort of manner. What you have, the ultimate reality, is absolute ego, manifested in finite ego and finite non-ego. Okay. Now what we observe in the phenomenal realm is that antithesis. Ego versus non-ego. So the phenomenological description describes this. We know the reality of the striving of will. We don't know the reality of physical non-ego. Let's just posit it. And so projecting this on the screen, absolute ego is the nature of reality. Okay. Well, try it with Schelling. Try it with Schelling. As I said, his point of departure is more the critique of judgment than the critique of practical reason. The focus is on the feeling one has of oneness with nature, the feeling of the ongoing teleology of which our aesthetic experience is a part, so forth. All right, so Schelling writes about the philosophy of nature in terms of an evolutionary idealism. The physical world is at an early stage in its gradual evolution of living, conscious spirit. And nature is a living force, impulsive, creative, bursting out with novelty. And when he turns to philosophy of mind, he sees the same sort of thing in human culture. There is a low level of creativity and emerging drive for novelty in theoretical thought, sense perception, theoretical knowledge. There is more of this creative drive going on in the practical realm, the moral and the political.